Right. Hey, hey, hey. Good evening, everybody. We are lucky this evening with my BBTV and the closing engine. We have Jason Kanigan with us today. And maybe if we are more lucky, we will have maybe some guests for the question and
Hmm.
answer period. I hope for the best. So, Jason, what's today's topic?
Oh, thank you, Stefan. I appreciate it, and my BBTV for hosting this. I did this a little bit earlier on Facebook Live, and something was wrong with the wireless, and it didn't. The function didn't happen very well. So I wanted to have a chance to do it again, and Stefan, you're helping me reach more people, so that's great. Um, Tonight, well, what I wanted to talk about is a serious problem in the real world, both above and below. It doesn't matter what level you're at, whether you're a freelancer or an engineering outfit. It doesn't really matter. You're going to run into this problem. You're going to have people requesting you to quote and sending you maybe bid documents, and you've got to send in your proposal. Or on the freelancer level, just bidding on freelance sites. And the problem is, even in interaction, you'll get this "what's your price?" question, and then you give it to them, and that's it. You hear nothing back, right? And so it could be a multi-million-dollar engineering project, or it could be a $100 freelancing project. This happens all over the place. It's rampant. I've been experiencing it and seeing it for 20 years. So I wanted to address that because I've seen it a lot recently in the last few days on membership forums that I'm a member of, expert platforms, and also just talking to people. So it's something that needs to be dealt with. People are stuck feeling that they have to dance the dance, right? If somebody asks you a question, you have to answer it. What's your price? I have to answer that. Give me your bid. Give me your proposal. I have to answer that. Well, you don't, okay? So going back to my own history, 20 odd years ago now, I got out of college when I was 22, and I went to work for engineering outfit that packaged industrial gas turbine generator sets. So we worked with big power plants, right? And we got our turbine engines from Kawasaki, and we'd get an alternator and package them up, and it was good. You know, the starting price was 200,000 US, and this was back in the mid 90s, and it went up to $1 million plus. And the first day I walked in, my office had a bookshelf in it, and there were a bunch of binders on the shelves, but they were empty. But they had cost price database, equipment specifications, terms and conditions, payment schedules, all on the binding side of these binders, right? The titles were there, but they were empty. And it was my job to flesh them out, fill them out. So I had to go in and create all these things. And what happened was I created a process that was really good at responding to that request for proposals. So we'd get a fax in from some company in India or Taiwan or something like that, wanting, or a mining outfit up in northern Canada, wanting a quote for a standby turbine generator set, right? That would be the most common thing because they were supposed to be slightly more reliable than diesel engines for startup. That might be an example. And so I had gotten very good at helping the company do this dance. Before I got there, it was a 40-hour, really labor-intensive process to create a quotation. And it tied up the owner's time, and it was just not good. So I got it down to 8 hours, and I was doing it. So I freed up my boss's time. He was really happy, and we had all this stuff to put together into a proposal binder and overnight courier it out around the world, wherever it needed to go. And I was pretty proud of myself, you know. But all it did was actually enable us to produce more paper documents faster, right? There's a serious problem here. Knowing what I know now about sales, I wish I could go back in time because I would be a lot more effective. I would probably bid on 1 in 100 projects that we were asked to bid on, but it would be a lot more effective, right? So scattershot approach is not very useful here. right? And the same goes for freelance sites. Just sending out a quote to bid on something, one-way process is not very useful, because what's actually happening is this. And I went to buyer's school, so I know all about this, right? It's what they're doing. The buyers are doing, professional buyers here. They're unraveling all the sales nonsense, and I'm a sales trainer, so I've seen both sides. They're unraveling all the sales stuff, and what they're doing, whether they're writing it down or putting it on the computer or just doing it in their heads, what everybody is doing is this. They're making a spreadsheet. That's what that buyer is doing. And down the side are the features listed. Across the top are the vendors, and along the bottom is the price. And so what that buyer is trying to do is figure out what is the best, the most number of features that I can get for the lowest price. Does this sound good to you as a vendor? It's probably not very good, right? It turns you all into a commodity. That's the worst part of it. And it's all because of this simple problem. There's no dialogue going on in between you, the vendor, and them, the buyer. And so it would happen later too. I worked there for 3 years, and then I moved laterally to a company where I sold motor control centers. That was a big thing. So they'd be $30,000, $40,000 panels, and we do. So these would start up the generator set. So it was good in the sense I still had to have all my engineering knowledge in that, but it transferred over. But it was different because I would get an engineering spec, and instead of telling the buyer this is what you get, which is what I had done with the power plants, I would have to match up. Okay, they've got this requirement for, let's say something simple. They wanted you to measure the temperature of the oil or something like that, right? And so there's multiple ways of accomplishing this. You could put in an analog dial, right? Just stick that in there. That's probably the cheapest thing you could do, and that would cost a few bucks, right? Or you could put in a digital gauge. That would cost a little more. And maybe the high-end thing that you could do back then, this was 1999, so I'm trying to remember back, they would have a programmable logic control unit, a PLC unit. And apparently there's still a lot of these PLCs around. I don't do much with them anymore, but they're an intermediate technology between circuit boards basically and computers, right? And computers became really cheap, and they generally replaced PLCs as an option. But back in the day, the PLC was the option for kind of the central brain of this thing. And that would be a really expensive price. So it would be up to me as the engineer to figure this out. Like, okay, which of these three options is the right fit here? They'll say, oh, the bid market is so fun, right? You don't know, right? What is this individual buyer valuing? If you can't have that dialogue, do they value the lowest price? Do they want something that's expandable for the future? Where's their sense of value here, right? Are they going to go, oh, he cheaped out if you pick the analog gauge, right? And so you really need to get into a conversation with that prospect as much as possible. And I know they'll block you a lot of times. They will block you and say, well, we want the process to be fair, but it's like the old David Sandler thing, right? If you don't know who's winning the bid the night before, you're not the winner, right? Somebody knows. There is talk, right? So trying to go around through your network and finding a connection into that organization to be able to talk to somebody. If you can't just have the direct conversation, find a way in, right? If you can't do that, get some kind of positioning document in there in your bid so that they can understand your process and you can differentiate yourself for this, because otherwise you're creating this commoditization problem, and you've done it to yourself, where that decision is being made with that spreadsheet and it's made behind a curtain. You never find out what the important issues are. Okay. Now, my day job, when I'm not doing talks like this, I'm running something with a partner called the Closing Engine, where we manage high-ticket sales teams. And that's all we do, is we run high-ticket sales teams that sell packages of $6,000 or more for coaches, trainers, info product creators. And it's like an outsourced sales department, basically. And one of the ways we know that we got into this problem where a prospect, a lead, has come to us, and the salesperson hasn't done any job of filtering like this and qualifying the prospect, and has just regurgitated the presentation, basically, phase of the sales process, is that the call is too short. The call is like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. We know. And I've done this myself. I make every mistake under the sun. That's why I have coaches to help me. Every business owner needs a coach. So, and that's a great comment there, Dale. So if you're recording your calls, or just even, you can look at the duration of them after you're done. If you're talking to prospective customers and you see that they're too short, that 20-minute call, you didn't differentiate yourself. And so something needs to change in that process. You need to get in the head more of how that prospect is valuing things. Otherwise, you got to get behind that curtain. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck outside and not understand why you lost that bid. Something you can do about it, like, is if I'm going to talk about freelancing for a minute here. When you get asked, what's your price? And this, I guess, could go for accountants or any kind of service provider, any kind of expert. What's your price? They don't know what else to ask. Typically, if that's their only question, they don't know what else to ask. And then if their money tolerance is lower than yours and you've given them this figure, they get embarrassed and they go away and you never hear from them again. So you want to interrupt their process, not rudely. I'll give you some wording in a second, and substitute your own process. So, hey, Jason, what's your price? Appreciate the question, Bill. Let me take a minute. I've got a couple questions to make sure that we're talking about the right thing, because I don't want to quote you on the wrong thing here. And then we'll get to that. Does that sound good? And get them on board with your process. Because if you don't, then you have to answer that question, and then there's nothing left, right? Like that potential buyer, that potential customer is not an expert in buying what you sell. And if they're not a corporate type with that buyer training that I've had, then they're not professional buyers either. They don't know enough to be able to ask the good questions. So you have to help them. And that's where interrupting their process and substituting your own can be so valuable. If you are bidding on jobs that have been posted, and say you're a freelance writer, a powerful option that I never see exercised, and I've used to my advantage many times, is transformative bidding, I guess you could call it, where I will take the project. I don't do freelancing anymore like this, but there was a period after I moved to the US. I moved to the US in 2009, and that is crazy. Moving countries, I moved from Canada to the US. You would not think it was a major cultural thing, but it was enough, like not having bank accounts and stuff and having to start over, right? So I did a bit of freelancing back then, and I would transform projects to make them much more valuable. One of the early ones I did in 2010, and I still have this letter. I put it on a private page of one of my websites so I could share it with people when I had the opportunity to. There was an accountant in Calgary, Alberta, who had put up a request for help with a referral source letter. She wanted a letter to send around to other accountants or other professionals and get them to refer stuff to her. And I went, this isn't going to work, and it had like a $50 budget or something. It wasn't going to work. So I transformed it by writing her a proposal back and saying, look, actually what you need is an entire referral program here. I'll make the calls for you to talk to these other professionals and make the introductions. I'll do it. I was adding massive value because nobody wants to make cold calls. I'm not afraid of it. I know the process. Here's what you need to do. I'll set up this arrangement. I'll do it for $3,000. Let's get on. Look at the difference. $50, $3,000, right? I need far fewer clients when I'm doing it this way, right? And she saw the value of it. And we went ahead with it, and it was a good project, right? She got a lot of value out of it. So instead of and like my advice to her at the end of this thing, she was like, "Well, I don't know how to hire you through the freelance systems process here, the site we were using." I said, "Cancel this project, invite me as the only bidder for this one, and we'll be done. Accept it. Like, think about the checkmate stuff here I'm doing to block out other buyers, right? Stefan and I talk about binary. He reminded me of this last week, and it was a great reminder. Your actions are binary. They're either 0 or 1. The 1 is revenue producing activity, or it's not. There's no 0.8 in the world, right? You don't almost get the job if you're job hunting, right? And if you feel bad that you're taking that job away from somebody else, I don't know what to tell you, right? I'm a kind person. I give a lot. I'm giving right now. But if it comes down to you or me getting that job and I need the job, I'm going to do whatever I can to outposition, outwork, outthink you and get that job. And by transforming a project like that, I'm making myself, I've got an audience of 1 here and that's it, right? I'm going to do it. And I suggest you do it too, as much as you can, especially if you're a freelancer, because you'll get better clients. They'll be more excited to work with you. And you just stand out so much better when you do something like that. I'm going to finish up here real quick and we'll hopefully get to exactly, Stefan. Yeah, 0, nothing happens, or 1, we're in business. And there's a newbie coach for online marketing. His name's Marlon Sanders. I like him a lot. And he put out a video a few years back where he was shouting, "Half done ain't done." Half done ain't done. And so you're working on a website, half done ain't done. You're working on a proposal, half done ain't done. Any project, half done ain't done. So it's a 1 or it's nothing. So I'm going to conclude with this example of doing some freelance work a few years ago now on awesome. We've got a Q&A coming up with a couple people. That's great. I'm hoping to just change your thinking about this stuff. So, reposition by engaging if you can, getting that conversation started, reach out and talk to that person who's put out the bid request. Go around and find a way into the organization to talk to people there if you can't contact them directly through the regular process. And transform the whole thing if you can. Stefan, we've got you back on the main screen. Is that what we want?
Yes, I just have Stephen Monaco from Kansas City, Missouri, as well as Sandra Lester from Toronto. So I will leave my place to them and upload them to the screen. Hold on.
Okay.
1 second.
All right. I just want to remind people before we get out of here, companies do not tell you their biggest problem on their website or in their bid document request. They don't. They hide all that stuff. And so you need to get that dialogue going to be able to get at that value information. What do they value? So, Stephen, Sandra, welcome.
Hi, Jason.
Stephen, I know you have run a big company, like a $70 million company. Is that right? In the 90s and that. Tell me about your experience in the problem here of quoting and bidding and being asked for, do your dog and pony shows, send me your stuff, and the decision being made behind a curtain and how you've worked around that, because you've obviously had a company that earned a lot of money.
During the days of that company, excuse me, that really wasn't an issue because we were selling software and the price was the price. Hang on 1 second, let me get a drink. But after I sold the company in 96 and had to stay on with Symantec as a consultant through 99, I became a chief marketing officer for hire and have been since then. So yeah, I've run into that for years and years now. And I use value-based pricing, which I know you're well aware of, and you can probably explain it better than I can. But rather than get into that situation where what's your hourly rate so they can try to grind you down, I just say, give me your scope. What do you need done? What are the timeframes? What are the deliverables? I'll get that stuff to you and we'll agree on a price. But whether I can do it in 30 minutes or it takes me 30 hours is not to be cavalier, but it's really none of the client's business. I will deliver, and I'm an expert at what I do. but I'm not gonna get ground down on an hourly rate.
Right. Exactly. That value-based pricing, there's a great textbook if anybody wants to message me on it. I'm not a big fan of textbooks usually, but there is one that I really, really like, and I'll have to go find it. It's in my library, the next room. But if anybody wants to message me about that, I will give it to you, and you can go get it. Because the guy really explains it, the whole concept well, and he gets into the headspace too, of like, oh, I don't know, I can't rip people off by doing it. You're not ripping people off. And nor, there's an example of a lady, a forensic accountant, who was very good at what she did. And she went and solved the problem on a tax issue that got the client like $900,000 back, right? And they were like, well, it only took you 3 hours to do this. What's your rate? And she said, oh, like $1,500 or something like that. Is that a fair exchange of value?
Absolutely
right?
not.
And because she was able to do it faster than Skippy, the newbie forensic accountant, right? She should be penalized in some way. Like, say it took him 20 hours, he should make $10,000 or something like that, right? So, Sandra, I'd love to hear what questions you have, or what of an angle you'd like to contribute here. Oh, you might be muted.
Yeah,
Hi there.
There you go, Sandra.
There you go.
There we go. Hi, Jason. I've been on both sides of the equation for RFPs. So I've both responded to RFPs and I've written them for other companies. And I find it difficult to, once you set the parameters, to rewrite it once it's been set in black and white. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
So if you have a scope change, right, then that's a good reason to go back to the issuer and say, look, things are not as they were. And that really needs to be initially dealt with. So much of this stuff is like set up in the expectations, right? And the initial agreement that you come to with that customer, right? Or even that prospect, right? This is how I work. And the secret here is always being willing to walk away. If it's not, because everybody's desperate for work, and we all love to work, but a lot of this comes back to positioning and being clear on your standards. Like I have a simple 3-part qualification system that everybody's got to go through. You have to have a need or a want for what I have to offer, which means you have to have a problem that I can solve, right? And if you don't admit to having it, why are we talking? Because we're just going to get buyer's remorse, right? Then they have to have a budget. And that's not, do they have money in their pocket? Is there, again, that problem? Does it exist? Is it large enough to warrant my involvement? And can you get an ROI enough to make it worthwhile, right? And then the third thing, which again, everybody wants to sweep under the rug, is personality fit, right? It's I don't care how much money you're waving in my direction. I really don't. I'm past that point. I want to work with cool people, treat me nicely, and I will do the same for you, right? And so if you say or do something that my last client from hell did, I'm going to call you on it right away in that sales process, right? And wow, that's really interesting. Why did you say that? Like, oh yeah, we had to fire our last 4 web designers. Whoop. Ding, ding. I don't want to be number 5, right?
Yeah, that's a red flag.
Maybe the designers aren't the problem here, right? So anything like that. So I'm going to qualify for those 3 things, and I'm going to lay out like a change order type process if we're in that formal environment before we ever even get into the hey, you're hired kind of situation, right? And say, look, here's the scope we're agreeing on. If you're going to change it, that's cool. But then we've got a resource issue, right? And we got to change it. And this, I think that really goes back to personality fit and making sure that person is okay to work with before you get really involved with them. I worked with, 2 years ago, I worked for the better part of a year with a change management consultant out of Holland. And all he did was work with tech companies that had 1,000 people or more on process change. And I know all about it, but I've never worked with companies with 1,000 people or more on change management, right? So it was really cool to be able to work with him. And so his thing, what I really got from him was there's no such thing as a technology problem, really. It's always a people problem. And that headspace of, no, I'm blocking the change. And so CoCreation was his touchstone, right? He always went back to that. And so when it comes to figuring out processes like this, I'm going to do my best to go for a co-creative approach where I'm going to, again, before we work together, we're going to figure out the terms of working together. And I'm not going to dictate to you so much, this is how it's going to be or else, because that's a nasty tone that I'd rather avoid, right? I want you to be involved, and I want you to support that process as well. Right, and so if you have a hand in its creation, if it's partly your baby, you're going to support it a lot more, right, and fight to make it work. And so that was a big key thing that I got from working with him. I think that I didn't have before, where I probably would have been a bit more dictatorial, still friendly, but here's the line. So what else, Stephen? Do you think that we could cover here that our viewers, would like to know about?
Well, I think you're spot on regarding defining or setting up expectations initially so that there isn't that scope creep. Mm-hmm. And you've got a price that's set for what you're going to do, and they keep adding on, piling on more and more. You need to be able to say, time out, much like the custom home builder. Their model. It's like you mentioned, a change order. It's like, well, a fireplace wasn't in the spec here. The architect didn't have one. I understand you want one now, although just like you said, resources. It's going to take it's going to take masonry people, and it's going to take time, and you got to buy the all the stuff. Right. So yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time, I think probably like you do, giving first, and so I can really understand the problem and make sure that I'm a good fit and they're a good fit for me. And I really want to help, really want to contribute. Right. But if it's not a good fit, like you said, I mean, we all want to work. I love working. I'll never stop because I like to contribute. I like to help. But there's, everybody isn't a good client.
Right. Right. And that's something I remember 10 years ago. I got sales training after being in the field for 10 years. And then suddenly I realized, wait a minute, I don't know why I'm getting some orders and not others. Something's wrong here. Right. Some guy came up to me who said, after I'd been doing this for about a year, he said, you say you don't want everyone to become a client or a customer, but you don't really mean that, do you? And it just struck me right there like, oh, wow. Right, it's you do have to walk this path, I guess, for a while to really make it a part of your life and a kind of a quick reaction, or this is what I'm doing.
I mean, you do mean it.
I do mean it. Yeah,
you can't serve.
But he didn't see that. He couldn't see that yet. So
you can't serve everybody. I mean,
no. Yeah. What about Sandra? Do you have any experience with grant funding at all, or grant applications?
That is a niche that is pretty specialized. I have worked on some grant applications. Yep. And I can say that I've got a 0 for 0 on those. So I'm batting 0 right now on those.
Okay. And that there may be a place to try and get that dialogue going between whoever's giving out the money. I suspected you might have some experience in that direction, and that's. I thank you for giving your honest feedback there, because it's tough. That is really a request for proposal in a sense. Just send it in and we'll see. Oh, and again, the decision's made behind a screen. I ran back in North Vancouver. I was the chair of the Social Planning Advisory Committee for 6 years. Well, 5 out of the 6 years I was on the committee. The first year I was vice chair. And we gave out all the grant money, essentially. We gave council the recommendations, and they rubber stamped what we did. And that process was very much like the RFP proposal a lot of the time. But the secret was, and they wanted us to go out and reach out and meet these people who were applying for the grants. You could come and talk to us, though. We could be approached, right? And so I think that opportunity exists more often than people bidding on things believe, right? There may be a bit of a block in the system, like a freelancing site not wanting you to have direct contact, right? But if that's not there, or if you can get around it in some way, like through your LinkedIn network or something like that, I highly recommend doing that. Because if you can have a 10-minute conversation, you'll get so much more information about what they value, what they're really looking for, their real pain points. Because like I said a little while ago, these organizations don't tell you their biggest problem on their website. They don't advertise it. They want to maintain the image that everything is glorious and wonderful, and there's no trouble here. Awesome.
That's so true.
I want somebody else to talk.
I think you're spot on that as well. I don't think you. I mean, I know you are. I do a lot of high-level marketing strategy stuff, and to get executives to admit that they have a gap there or a need, and that they haven't nailed the strategy is difficult often, because it's an ego thing, and They don't want to admit that shortcoming. So it's not like they advertise or wave like, here's the problem. It takes a lot of discussion to get under, uncover the issue and figure out what the problem is.
where that people problem is secretly hiding.
It almost always is a people thing.
Yeah. Otherwise, we'd have the clones of SAP that are running around would be doing very well. But it's been 30 years, and everybody's in the same spot. So, curious, Sandra. I really would like to hear from you on something. I know you've got something. The thing is, I just met you. So what's an area that would be useful for you to share with our audience?
Sure.
Something about bidding and selling.
Sure.
So
I guess
works in a really cool space. I mean, I'm eager to have. I mean, we know each other through Facebook, so I know her story.
Okay.
It's a good story it's worth hearing.
Lead us. Yes.
Okay. So back to the person side of things and technology side of things, I realized that healthy and green buildings were really a decision-making process fault. So I've coined the term architectural interventionalist.
Okay.
I basically intervene in just like a family would if they have a family member or a friend that's a drug addict, and the person is addicted to something and they need an intervention. Similarly, I intervene in the process of procuring architecture. So I help them write an RFP that is appropriate for their organization. Through a discovery process, I find out what their priorities are. A lot of them don't want a plaque on the wall to say that their building is green, but they do want things like lower utility costs. They want to put more money into patient care instead of sending it over to the bill for heat and electricity. So I see a lot of RFPs from being on the other end of the equation where they're asking for a LEED silver building.
Yes.
It's just disappointing to see everything that they want wrapped up in 2 words. And I know that they want more than that. So the people that I can get to help them define what that looks like, that's where they get the opportunity to excel. So I really help create those exceptional buildings for them if I can help them write the RFP. And the performance.
And it's a question and answer type thing too. It's you have to have a dialogue.
Yeah, I get
what you're saying about the leads. it's not enough. It's like, well, do you want a green roof, right, with a rooftop garden or something like that, or geothermal heating, or what?
Or do you want a regular building with solar panels on it? Like, a lot of people just tack it on and they think that they did a green building. But
what do you wish that the preparers of these proposals who aren't engaging with you would include or do before they get that document finished and say, okay, it's ready to be sent out?
I would say that they look at what they really want, and then they figure out a good way to measure it. Let's find out how to measure success. So I did a master's certificate in organization development, a certificate in change management. And what I found was you have to know where you're trying to get to in order to create a pathway there.
Sure.
So figure out what you actually really want and then ways to measure success. I call them transformational performance indicators, or TPIs, instead of KPIs.
Yeah.
So I kind of have fun with the process. In dialogue with a hospital that I worked on, it won an innovation award from the Canada Green Building Council in October. That became a 17-page list of requirements that they had to do on that hospital. And we measured.
So a much clearer vision of the future, where you're trying to build to. And I'll bet that you spark a lot more creativity in how to get there too, than just those two LEED silver standards, right?
Yeah, it's not just checking the boxes. It's basically like, oh, I know what they want. Let's figure out a creative way socioeconomically to get there. Using
and then the measures follow that.
Yeah, and then it becomes exciting for them. And like, okay, we don't have 50% green roof, excluding the area used for solar panels, HVAC equipment, and elevator lifts. But, so we didn't tick that box. But what we did was we decided to provide bee habitat because bee species are actually at risk in our area, and we want to provide a refuge for them. And yeah, it's on the second floor roof and not on the 16th floor roof, just as an example. And then it becomes something interesting for actually somebody to engage in, for the visitors to see. Becomes actually a feature for the building and makes the client stand out in this amazing way as well.
Well,
so I think that's a fantastic
too, with the bees, because of the danger of extinction and what it would do for pollination or the lack thereof into our food supply. That's an awesome example, Sandra.
Yeah, I think it's a great example of getting those creative juices flowing through that dialogue that didn't exist beforehand, right? And it would have been just this very flat, lackluster term in a bid document, right?
Yeah.
Without it, exactly. it wouldn't have been alive. And so we take that into any other field, whether it's IT or writing or engineering, freelancing, whatever, right? And the same thing can happen with the right kind of dialogue.
Good point. I never saw it that way, and wow, I can just start imagining all these RFPs done so differently across the board,
rather than this tower silo based. Okay, you give me this, and I'll give you that, and we won't talk except in this one really crappy form.
Exactly.
That's great insight, Jason.
Awesome. Well, good. Does anybody have anything to add, or should we wrap up? I think we're good, and hopefully our audience will have some questions. Anybody who wants to connect with me and ask any questions based on this, that's cool. And I really appreciate meeting you guys. It was a really good experience, and I hadn't heard LEED certification in a number of years since leaving Vancouver. So it was great to hear those words and go, "Oh yeah, I remember that."
Well, great talking to you. This was really insightful.
Very.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll have the chance to get on again.
Sure.
And thank you, Stefan, for managing us.
Yes, Stefan, thanks. Behind the scenes, wherever you are.
That's right. All right,
Okay.
guys. Bye for now.
Good night, all.
Bye.
Good night.